The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone. A very happy Thursday to everybody out there. Thanks for tuning in. Chandler Holt joining us for this second hour. Again, if you don't know Chandler, you're just tuning in. He does the Jazz Notes podcast with me every Monday. He also is a digital producer at KSLSports.com. So if you've read anything at KSL Sports, you have read Chandler. All right, Chandler, one of the big questions for the Utah Jazz is about Walker Kessler's future.
Yes.
In fact, one of the things we like to do on our podcast is we do a big mailbag, and it's actually most of the show.
Yeah.
Basically, we'll catch you up on the news and the notes of the week, look at their last games, the games that are coming up, but then we'll get to a mailbag, and they usually have 15 questions, 25 questions. Last week's is 35 questions, I think it was, because of the Jaren Jackson Jr. trade. So, but we will answer your questions in DMs or whatever you want to do. Cash Merrill did DM me and says, do you think if Walker ends up getting more from another team than we can bear right now, talking about the Jazz, do we stick with Nurk as a starter or find a backup? Would that work with Triple J, or do we let Nurk expire and go find a better starting center? Just reading stuff like the Walker Kessler's camp believes he's worth much, much more than $25 million per year, according to Tim McMahon. Can the Jazz afford him? My understanding, again, is that Walker truly has always been in the plans. In the Jazz last offseason, people I talked to just said, yeah, we're just not going to pay him this year, and we will pay him next year. Like, he's going to hit restricted free agency, and we are going to match whatever it is, and we are not going to keep moving on from these young players that we want to invest in and want to be a part of the team. We just don't need to pay him right now.
Yeah.
And until we need to pay him, we will. The conversation does change, though, if Walker gets a truly massive offer. You know, $25 million is probably what the Jazz want. I think that's exactly what Tim McMahon reported, was that's kind of where the number the Jazz like for Walker. And Walker's camp thinks he's worth more. The hard part for Walker's camp is that they have to find more than. Like, I can think I'm worth whatever I want. I can think I'm worth $2 million a year. If I go to every local network here or radio station here, and people say you're worth $15,000, I'm worth $15,000. Like,
yeah.
That's the problem. It doesn't matter what I think I'm worth. It matters what they think I'm worth. So Walker's going to hit the market. I suspect the Jazz will put an offer on the table for him. He's going to turn it down. He's going to say, let me go find as much money as I can. The Jazz say, God bless, and come back to us with the number, and we'll match that number. And I just still don't think he's going to get this enormous contract that maybe some Jazz fans are afraid of.
Yeah, speaking about the interest for Walker, two of the biggest teams that were interested in him made deals for big men at the trade deadline.
Yeah.
You have Washington trading for Anthony Davis, and then Indiana trading for Ivica Zubac.
Yeah.
Another team linked to him has been the Lakers, but the Lakers have to pay Austin Reeves, who's eligible for $240 million this summer.
And he's going to get it.
Yeah.
Probably going to get it.
So I don't know who's going to be giving him $30 million or more this year.
So I guess another question here, and maybe the Clippers get into it. Atlanta needs a center now because they just traded Kristaps Porzingis. Like, there are some teams that need centers, no question about it. There will be a market for Walker.
Yes.
However, it's not a free market because he's not a free agent. He's a restricted free agent. So there's a restricted market for him. It's going to scare some people off. And somebody will just say, hey, we think we can get somebody else cheaper, or we drafted a guy at 22 or 24, which, by the way, Walker was drafted at 22. Like, somebody will say, well, what if I can repeat that same thing? You know, what if I can have that magic and not have to pay a guy who still does have some very real questions about his overall potential, his future, his health, now coming off of his shoulder surgery. How much do you want to pay him? And I really do doubt that somebody's going to give him $35 or $40 million, having 2 good years under his belt, having 1 bad year under his belt. He was bad in his second season. Like, he was not a good player. He was very good in his third year. He was pretty good in his first year, and then showed a couple of flashes early this season, and obviously it just never materialized because of the shoulder injury. So I actually don't really believe this poison pill toxic offer is going to come for Walker that the Jazz won't match. And I'm sure the Jazz are prepared to match whatever, understanding that if he's as good as advertised, they'll trade him.
Yeah.
Or if he's actually worth that money and they can't afford it, they'll trade him. The worst case scenario would be if they sign him for $35 million and he just stinks and doesn't fit on the roster, and then you can't get rid of him. That would be the, I guess, worst case and most difficult scenario for the Jazz.
Before this report came out, what I had said was $20 million would be good for the Jazz. 25 is where it probably will be, and 30 would be good for Walker. hearing that way more than 25, like that makes me think he's looking at like 32 plus.
Yeah.
Which I think that really just sort of locks the Jazz into their current roster. Not to mention you will have to pay Keontae George in a year.
Yep.
And then eventually Ace Bailey in your draft pick this year.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it would be best, and everything I've ever heard is that Walker loves it here. And I think the Jazz love him, and I think bringing Jaren Jackson in makes him a lot more important. And I think, like you said, he's always been a part of the plans. So yeah, I think it's very interesting. I wonder what the final number will be.
If I'm Walker's camp, I am going and saying I'm better than Jakob Poeltl. Like, I'm younger. I'm going to be a better offensive player. I think I'm going to be equally impactful. Jakob Poeltl's a pretty good defensive player. I'm at least that good of a player, and I have a higher ceiling. And he's making $29.4 million in this 28-29 season. Like, he just signed an extension. I think that's I'm worth that much if he's worth that much, if not more. That's why I'm looking at that 30 number. And I think the Jazz would say, go find it then. Honestly, I think the Jazz would say, go find it. And I think the Jazz would easily stomach a $30 million contract if that's what it ended up being. And it's a lot. You're paying a ton for your front court then. But you do have to pay to win. And the Jazz have not been paying very much money over the last few years in all their losing seasons. So ideally, if you're a Jazz fan, Ryan Smith has been saving that money up for when he is comfortable to pay it for a winning roster. And then if you have to pivot after that, you have to find a way to pivot. You probably got to get creative to do it, but you should have those tools. But that's probably the number Walker's looking at. I understand why his camp would want that.
Yep.
Now it's about finding it. Again, I don't think anyone's finding $35 million.
Yeah.
And the question then becomes, what's the motivation outside of I'm just trying to get as much money as possible? I bet you if you're a young player like Walker Kessler and his camp, I think CAA or whatever his agency is, and you hear the Lakers want me, that's got to be really intriguing. That's got to be enticing.
Yeah.
And then the Lakers want me, and they have Luka, who Luka makes every center look like a superstar. I mean, people were talking about Derek Lively as a rookie, like going to be one of the future great centers of the NBA, and he was injured this year, so he just didn't play. But, like, he's fine.
Yeah.
Again, that's the Walker Kessler problem, is that, like, you can actually find Derek Lively at 10 or later in the draft, which is valuable but not the most valuable draft pick. If I can find a guy who can go and be big and run and jump and finish some baskets at the hoop, maybe I don't need to spend $30 million on Walker, which is actually, while the Jazz could say that and not pay him, I think that's probably a better reason for other teams not to pay him, especially if they know the Jazz are going to match the offer. Like,
yeah.
I think there are too many traps and pitfalls for teams that want to go give Walker a big deal because they can say, well, I can get somebody for cheaper, or I can draft somebody, or I know the Jazz are going to match it, so what am I doing here?
Yeah.
I think that's the problem for Walker's camp.
And I had just talked about how interesting Jaren Jackson playing next to Walker Kessler would be. But on the other end of that spectrum, Jaren Jackson is such a good backline defender that you could probably get away with having a mid-level center next to him.
Yeah, you don't need to have a superstar center. Now, there's no such thing as too much of a good thing in the NBA.
True.
Like, stacking strengths is one of the best things you can do.
Yes.
If you're a good shooting team, you have Steph, the best thing to do is to add Clay, not say, well, what if we surround him with bad shooters because Steph carries such a big load. No, keep adding more shooting and more shooting around him. That way, where inevitably you do have a weakness in that area, maybe it's, Draymond Green or whatever, Andre Iguodala, you can account for some of those flaws. If you are the Jazz, okay, well, now maybe you can get away with having a lesser defender somewhere, and that's Lauri Markkanen, or that's Keontae George, but you have Jaren Jackson Jr. and Walker. They do account for some of it by stacking those strengths. So that's why I do think the Jazz will be invested in Walker and why I do expect him to be around. I totally understand the concern of the money, and it's real, and the Jazz will pay attention to it as well. Again, they're just not going into this haphazardly.
Yes.
They're not going to go into this without the thought of recognizing what they are getting into and what this was going to cost when they balked at it last year. And I will say, if you missed it yesterday, I'd go listen to it. Scotty G had a good interview with Danny Ainge. And they were kind of talking about how did this come together? How quickly did it come together with Jaren? And the one thing Danny said over and over and over was Jaren's not available. Jaren was not available. Jaren was not available. Meaning the Jazz were probably kicking the tires on Jaren Jackson Jr. And you kick the tires on everybody. You want to know who's on the market. But Danny consistently said, yeah, he wasn't available. He wasn't available. And then he became available, and we quickly put an offer together.
Yeah.
And there is a difference between we listened or, hey, we had a discussion and we made an offer. Danny quickly said, we put an offer together. Like, I think as soon as Jaren became available, the Jazz said, that's the target. That's the guy we've been waiting for. And there's probably 5 players on that list.
Yeah.
But that's one of the guys on this list the Jazz have been waiting for. So even if, maybe it was a little bit of a surprise that they're ending the season with a $50 million Jaren Jackson Jr. type player on the roster, they knew that I think that was a possibility and even accounted for that without paying Walker last season.
Yeah, and this is something that me and you have talked about over and over and over. The Jazz were thinking about 2029 before they made the Jaren Jackson deal. Like, they are thinking so many steps ahead that they are thinking about contracts. They are thinking about what the team might look like when they're eventually contending for a championship, because I don't think the expectation is that next year. Like, you're probably just trying to make the playoffs next year. But Ryan Smith has said over and over he wants to bring a championship to Utah. So they are thinking so many steps ahead, and even though to us it is a worry, like, how is the playbook gonna sort of fall once you have to pay Keontae and all this stuff? They have a plan, at least a semblance of a plan, because you don't know exactly how things are gonna fall.
Concepts of a plan.
Yes.
One of the things that the Jazz could do also is, and we talked about this on the podcast, if Lowry or if Walker's camp is obsessed with the $30 million number, you could start him high and say 32.5, and then drop it to 30, and then drop it to 27, and then drop it to 25, and say, look, your average per year is $28.5 million. Your first 2 seasons, you're getting 32 and 30. Like, you are getting your big money up front, and yes, it decreases, and that helps us on the back end when we're paying Keontae or we're paying this X, Y, and Z, but you get your money early,
yes,
and you're that $30 million player. There are ways to work this, so
yeah.
we'll see what the Jazz end up doing. All right, we will wrap up the show. Coming up next, we'll talk about Ace Bailey and his big news coming up this weekend. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.